Welcome, beautiful J4 family and community. Thank you guys for joining us for another edition of Dad's Talk on a Sunday. I hope your week went well and that your weekend went even better, that you followed your Sunday ritual, whether that was a nice hot cup of coffee to get you started. Perhaps you have a Sunday routine that involves cleaning to your favorite music, whatever it is, man. I hope that you are grooving with it. And more importantly, thank you for joining us over here. We definitely want to know who's in these boxes with us. Love to know what platform you're on, whether it's LinkedIn, Facebook Live, or YouTube. Please let us know who you are, kind of what platform you're repping, and maybe what's your status as a dad. Dad's Talk is simply an old man's way of constructively using empty nest time to vibe and converse with fellow dads across various sectors of life. Dads who are at different stages of raising children, perhaps they have young children on the age spectrum, maybe teenagers, which is always a very interesting time of life, or maybe they're more in a dad mentor kind of relationship where their sons are grown human beings. To give a little context, I'm a father of six, ranging from 17 years old to 32 years old. In fact, as I was telling Dr. Emeka here, my youngest is now graduating from high school and getting ready to go off to college, and my oldest one is, kind of well into her life, also a PhD candidate. So I'm speaking from experience, speaking from life lived, but certainly don't convey any expertise. Just love to join with beautiful fathers who are fully immersed in the experience. Speaking of, Dr. Iguanu, how are you, brother? How you been?
Doing good, brother AJ. Just out here working and learning, and trying to grow.
Working, learning, trying to grow. Just to give a little context, Mecca and I have been dear friends and colleagues. I don't even know, maybe 10, 15 years. So I've seen him grow as a student, an undergrad out there in Ohio, part of the SOB, Student African American Brotherhood Organization. Again, the development of men. Shout out to Dr. Bledsoe and company, and who has kind of just always been pursued, always sort of very male centered in terms of their growth and development, but also just continuously about being an example lived. Doc, so tell them how you pronounce your last name so I don't destroy it.
My last name is pronounced E.K. Guano.
EK Guano. I'm gonna call you Dr. Met.
It's all good, brother
EK
AJ.
Guano. Hey, so thank you for joining us, man. Any opening remarks you want to say just to introduce yourself, kind of, you know, what you do for a living and what's your fatherhood status?
Fatherhood status is I have one son. My son is 5, 4 foot 2, approaching probably about 65, 70 pounds. So he's a pretty big boy. Um, for a living, I am a quantitative researcher slash professor. I teach at mid a Minnesota mid region institution in like middle and in the middle of the state. Teaching higher education. Again, I teach budgeting and finance and all quantitative methods. And if someone asks me, well, what I research how institutions basically make decisions and how does that impact students and how they engage within the institution in a financial context. So fit tuition and fees and how does that impact students in terms of how they engage with the institution.
Brother, so proud of you, man. So proud of what you're doing and the journey you've been on. And so you say you have a 4 year old,
5 year old. He's a 5 year old.
5 year old. So he's on the dawn of kindergarten, huh?
Yes, sir. And it's funny. We don't want to put him in school because of some racist experiences he had in his like a child care setting where
Mm.
he was called aggressive and violent,
Mm-hmm.
and he was only 3. And then it went from
Mm-hmm.
aggressive and violent to trying to diagnose him with Asperger's to seeking counseling services that basically try to call him violent again. And my wife just kind of got fed up and was like, I'm not putting him in this situation where he's going to constantly be seen as a violent, aggressive kid just because he's not doing what little Timmy is doing. So little Timmy can literally hit you, but because he's seen as small and not as aggressive, or
Mm-hmm.
seen as small, it doesn't hurt. But then my son just might just sit there or stand. He's seen as being defiant. He's being seen
Mm-hmm.
as just obstruction, whatever the ODD stands for. So
Mm-hmm.
my wife was like, "We're not gonna do this. We're not gonna traumatize him." So he's not going to probably go to school for a couple years.
You gonna homeschool?
Yeah, we actually homeschooling right now.
Wow. Before we bring in Dr. Martin, Doc, you're talking about sort of in the space of Dr. Joanza Kajufu's work. about black boys in the K-12 system, right? You know, boys by nature are expressive, they're mobile, they want to move, they joust, they kind of roughhouse a little bit. But if there's a preconceived notion that black boys are prone to aggression, you'll see aggression, right? And
Yes,
to use
sir.
Timmy as your analogy, Timmy's displaying the same behaviors in different kinds of ways and vernacular, but he too is a 4 or 5 year old kid expressing male biology at that age. But if you're sort of pre-oriented to associate aggressiveness with black maleness, then you'll discover it, right? And then you kick in with the diagnoses and all the IEP kinds of things, and all of a sudden your baby is tracked in special ed or labeled in their file as sort of behavioral problems, right? So as parents, we definitely got to be over hyper sensitive in evaluating how our babies are perceived and how they're set up, right? Because imagine having that label put on baby boy at 5 years old and having to shoulder that as they're just trying to experience all these newfound social settings and all those kind of things. So hats off to you and the wife, man.
Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm. Dr. Martin, how you been, brother? You on mute?
I'm well. I'm well. How about you, man? Sorry, I'm a few minutes behind, but good to be here. Good to be in the house.
Yeah, I always worry about these time zones, right? You know,
Yeah,
am I conveying it correctly? Did I say it correctly? But hey,
yeah.
Dr. Martin, thank you for joining us. There's a fellow alpha up there as well as a fellow PhD. Emeka, he and I have been good friends. Travis, I realize we're Facebook friends, LinkedIn friends. I don't know if we've ever had a chance to be in the same room together, but I appreciate all your support for the channel, man. Thank you so much for that.
Yeah, man. AJ, if I could, if you indulge me a minute, you may not remember this, but we're Facebook friends because I think I connected with you years ago because I admired a lot of your work you were doing. We met at Am I My Brother's Keepers Conference 2006, 7 maybe at
In
the University
Kansas?
of Kansas. Yep.
With Rob Page?
Yep, Rob
Okay.
Page. Yeah. So I have
Yeah.
followed you ever since, man. I was a young graduate student. Like, man,
Yeah.
it's good to be around somebody that looked like me, at least doing some good work in higher ed. So yeah, full circle, man. It's good to be with you.
Man, that's so beautiful. It just goes to say, and all of y'all are in higher ed. It just you never know when you kind of touch somebody or make a connection with them, and it doesn't have to be announced. I appreciate the compliment, but just the work is for personal. I get a personal fulfillment out of the work, but to connect with like-minded individuals, from an older perspective, where younger professionals can find some pieces of influence or inspiration. That's beloved, man. Appreciate that. So, Doc Travis, tell us kind of what you do and what your father's status is.
Yeah. I currently in student affairs, higher ed administration space. I currently serve as associate dean of students at the University of Michigan, and so been here a little under a year. Spent some time prior to that at Northwestern University up in Evanston, Illinois, and prior to that which is where I finished my doctorate at the University of Georgia. Doctorate is in higher ed leadership, college student affairs, administration, and have been doing student affairs work since you and I met, right, years ago. And so glad to be kind of doing this work here. Father space is, I'm a relatively new father. I still call myself a relatively new father. I have a 3-year-old,
Okay.
and so 3-year-old daughter. And it's been a great journey, man, and it's been a long journey, at least for my partner, my wife, and I, to get to parenthood. And so definitely want to share and be able to share that story around. There are non-traditional pathways to parenthood and fatherhood, and so I know a lot of folks and couples, et cetera, struggle with trying to navigate that space. But we are blessed to be here. And excited to at least share my experiences around fatherhood with your audience. So
Beautiful. Now you mentioned non-traditional. Explain that a little bit more in your case.
yeah. I often share, um, you know, we always have this preconceived notion of what parenthood gets, right? You get married, right? And at least let me speak for myself, right? You get married, and shortly thereafter come the child or children, and we dealt with fertility issues for a number of years.
Okay.
And so we had to really lean into medicine, right, in a way that being a country boy from Mississippi, right, which we always lean on our faith, right? I always say Mississippians, you can't shake many Mississippians' faith, right? So,
right.
Or at least our religious perspectives. And so we struggled for a number of years, man, and we had to, certainly have a different perspective in how we trust in God to get us there. And so we had to have help from professionals, right, to get us to childhood. And we were about 10 years in our marriage before we became parents. So now we're here.
Well, I'm glad it worked, brother. I'm glad your faith prevailed, coupled with modern medicine. But that's so beautiful, man. I imagine 10 years trying, there could have been some stress, some tense conversations among the privacy of your own home, but you guys stuck to it.
Absolutely.
Beautiful. So just the format for those listening in, and again, thank you guys. If you're here, please put a comment in, let us know where you're from. Dad's Talk is a kind of a weekly show where I invite men to come in, and I ask them in advance to share some questions that might be on their spirit, their heart, and then we can explore them here together. But overarching, I want this show to be a sounding board or a listening in board around the space of fatherhood, whether you're married, not, single parent, kid lives with the mom, whatever the case may be. But the overarching reason is that 51% of our babies, Black babies, are born to single parent homes. They live in single parent situations. A lot of times you'll hear that number in the 70s, 80s, but that's the marital status of mom at the hospital when doctor asks, are you married? So it doesn't mean that the dad is not in the home or that they're not engaged on the way to being married, but the true number of single babies that are in one single parent homes, it is 51%. That is a problem. I think you guys would agree, particularly when compared to all races as a totality, it's 25%. There's a lot going on in the manosphere around marriage and relationships. I hope that conversation continues and that we do have healthier relationships in the Black community. But from my lane, I am critically concerned that too many of our babies are born to single parent homes. Shout out to Art Hightower, beautiful human being. Good to see you, brother. That's a problem. So let's talk about your parenting status. I'll start. My parents were married, biracial couple, interracial marriage, mid 60s. 1% of children were interracial at the time. About a 20% approval rate of interracial marriages. That's obviously changed today. But it was a stressor on the relationship, and there was some tension there. There was some intercultural tensions. My mom was from France. My dad was from Gary, Indiana, by way of New Orleans. And they ended up getting divorced when I was 16. And so I then went from a biracial space to living with my dad, and then I was immersed into a Black experience. And that very much began for me a cultural journey into Black manhood, which has always been shaped my work. And so I'm glad that when I survey a room, more and more people are talking about coming from two-parent homes, but still overwhelming. You hear and see in the eyes of the beautiful men, the pain or the dynamics of being raised in single-parent homes, largely by mothers. So that didn't happen for me until I was 16, past my formidable years. And so I do know what two-parent raising is in all of its beauty and problems. Mecca, how about you?
That's an interesting question. So my dad is from West Africa, Nigeria in particular, and specifically, my parents were not married, but my dad always came. Anytime he came to visit, he stayed with us, right? And this was years, like decades, right? So I always just kind of knew, like, this is what I thought two-parent households were.
Yeah, that was your example.
That's my example, right? It wasn't until I went to college and I made that statement that people started looking at me weird. And one of the young women that I was in college with, she was like, you don't think that's weird? And I was like, nah, this is what I know. Like, my dad came in when my parents weren't married. For the most part, I saw my mom, but when my dad came, my dad was in charge. This was the norm. So that was, but my dad got remarried. And when he got remarried, was when the shift happened, right? So then I went to stay with my stepmom, and then it was like, okay, now this is two-parent homes, but it's, like, I never really saw what a two-parent marriage really was, in my opinion. So it's funny, right, Travis, because I went to that same conference. I went to the Am I My Brother's Keeper conference, the first one in 2004, was when I met you, brother AJ, because you and brother Lasana was there, and y'all did this presentation. And was it what's the is it Byron Short Q?
Byron Hurt, yeah.
Byron Hurt. Byron Hurt. Okay, I think it was Byron Hurt. He asked a question where he was like, how many of y'all have bad relationships with your father? And I thought in a room full of 110 black men, 90 to 100 were gonna stand up. 5 of us stood up. And we looked around at each other and was like, okay, well, that's when I knew like maybe my perceptions of life were a little bit different. So that was when I actually started advancing and understanding like, okay, what I thought was normal isn't actually normal. So that was like a really long story to kind of say like what I saw as a 2-parent home wasn't always really what it was. And how I grew up, like my grandparents were married, but my grandparents didn't even sleep in the same room. So they slept across the hall. Yeah. So it was like, well, were you really married? And then it started, sparking things in my head like, well, what is marriage? So that was how I kind of saw, or how I was kind of brought up in my upbringing.
So when Byron asked the question, what was the question again he asked?
How many of you in this room have bad relationships with your father?
It's a very small percentage.
It was only 5 of us. 5 or 6 stood up out of a room of 110, 115.
And that's a good thing, but it speaks to the perception of men. Similar earlier where we talked about your son being perceived or thought as something and then they manifest it, right? That we too carry perhaps statistical non-truths, in our own dynamic, right? Well, and go ahead, Travis.
Yeah, I was going to say, that's fascinating, and not to say I do believe we should challenge narratives too, but I'm also thinking about the setting, right? You're at a conference where a bunch of college men who are on their way to, to earning higher education, right? And we need to often remember the positive aspects of what it means to come from a 2-parent household and what that means for, educational outcomes, et cetera. And certainly, yeah, I think that space could have contributed to that number. Not to say that number would have been, exponentially higher, but it could have looked different, right, if you were in a different setting.
Yeah, there's a skewing, there's a skewing to higher education, and by no means are we implying an eliteness associated with education. 50% of some people have college, 30% will achieve a bachelor's, 7% a master's, 3% a PhD. But there is something about the support, the village aspect that involves men and women, and that is a pathway often to college, right? Beautiful. Travis, what was your situation with your pop?
Yeah, I was fortunate enough to come from a 2-parent household, right? Mom and dad from birth to at least through college. My parents eventually did divorce, but I was an adult when that happened, and they actually divorced and reunited. So they had a little bit different story. My dad is no longer with us, but they did reunite prior to him passing in 2014. And so, I was fortunate enough to have both parents in the household. I was just talking briefly with some friends of mine about, there were still some, as I look back on parts of my upbringings that impacted me, even with 2 parents in the household, that informs how I think I would want to do fatherhood different. Not to say my dad was not a good father, but I do think, the traditional aspect of particularly thinking about the father not being as emotionally attached to the family. My dad was certainly a great provider, right? He was the provider of our house, and that's kind of how he operated. But yeah, luckily I have both parents in the house, and I know that certainly contributed.
Well, either Marquise Elliott, or you teed him up, or serendipitously he said your very same statement. Marquise, what's good, brother? Chandler, representing Chandler, Arizona. He says, no, I don't and will not father like my father. Powerful. I'm from a 2-person household. Okay, both parents are master graduates. Okay, very privileged, but not emotionally protected. All right. We're going to visit that question as the premise of the title of what we talked about. Marquise, thank you so much for participating. And if any of y'all feeling motivated, Arthur or Marquise, and y'all want to get in here with us, let me know and I'll drop the link. Travis, you talked about your parents divorced after you were out of school, and when maybe the grass was greener, realized it wasn't, came back, right? Emeka, your dad came in periodically. Do do you think fathers stay in relationships uh, out of not wanting to create a single parent situation? And if they do, is there a threshold by which they would leave? I guess to say it more poignantly, I think your father identity trumps your husband identity and how you might perceive that, right? If that's frustrated and divorce pops in your mind, as it all does, it pops in everyone's mind periodically. But I think the identity of father for a period of time should prevail or be the dominant identity, which would keep you there, and short of high dysfunctionality, violence, that kind of stuff. But what's your thoughts on that statement? Either one of you.
I mean, I think you're accurate in terms of, well, I'll tell it this way. My wife tells her friends, when they say like, how do you get your husband to do all this stuff, or how you get him to do stuff and ask, whatever with his son, and she's like, well, he wants to be a father and he wants to be married. So I think oftentimes that if you want to be a father, your fatherhood identity is salient to you, right? So I want to see my son every single day. I also want to I want to make time for my son, and I think that's something that is important to me. But I also have to put in context that previous experiences shape who we are,
Yeah.
right? And previous generations, and I'll say previous generations, specifically talking like my dad was born and lived through a civil war in a foreign country, right? So when I got into being an adult, how I looked at my father is a lot different than how I looked at my father when I was growing up. So I don't know if he had the bad, like he literally was the person that was like how some families root for the person to go to the NFL and the NBA. So he had to come to America. He had to get a degree, and then he had to support two families on two different continents.
Yeah.
I would not want that, in any context. I don't know if I could be able mentally, physically, or emotionally to carry that weight. So, how I look at that is very different now when I look at my son. And I want my son to understand, like, I'm not trying to parent as if my father. I'm not trying to do what my father didn't do. I'm trying to look at this in a holistic fatherhood and saying, what do you need? Because me being here for you might not be what you need. You might need something in relative form to saying something like, I need you to give me more feedback. I need you to push me more, right? Which is what I didn't need from my father. I had my own internal drive. So that's how I would kind of answer that question.
Yeah, that's a really good question, AJ. And as I was sitting here thinking, I would agree. If you had asked me that question maybe even yesterday, I would have been like. But as I'm sitting here thinking and really processing what you're asking, I think it's fascinating, right? I think our fatherhood identity, and particularly our journey to parenthood, right? I think we stay in it because we want to be good parents, right? And we both view our togetherness as being good parents, right? And certainly even in our marriage, right? We've seen our marriage even shift when we became parents and how we interact and get along with each other. And so, whereas I would feel a little guilty saying that, but when I think about it truthfully, we are in this together, my wife and partner and I, because of certainly a large part of because we wanted to be parents, and so and since we've been parents, I think our marriage has even grown and gotten better because of that. So
it's an evolving, right? You first meet each other, there's high adoration, puppy love. You date, you court, you realize this person is a future potential for me. That's mutual. You go through intense courting and announcement to the world and moving in, right? But as soon as that baby comes in the picture, if anything, a new identity, a new dominant identity is then presented in the space of fatherhood. Arthur talks about, I think he says he agrees with that. I think the thought is you will always be a father, but you can be a husband again. I Marquis says, Emeka agreed. Making the time, action, and effort to be in your child's life can be the emotional response that is needed for your sons and daughters. My father and mother coddled my sister and myself and brother, thrown off the deep end. Fatherhood identity, we all see it differently. It's based on past experiences and how we want to change what we have been thought for the better. It's a process, no doubt, brother. I put the link to the StreamYard. If some of y'all want to come in and maybe get in on a question or two, feel free. But let me just restate this clearly. When you go through your relationship and you and your partner get very familiar and you settle in, both of y'all are meeting each other's non-negotiables and you have some harmony there. I hope there's love, there's laughter. I hope the sex and intimacy is beautiful. But if you all are still struggling through what you are as a couple, you have to juxtapose that as to if one of y'all leave, what does that mean to the life of the child, right? There has to be a threshold of inconvenience and accepted aggravation that as husbands we are willing to go through that does not trump the identity of father, right? Again, assuming manageability, non-violence, not high dysfunctionality, but we should accept some level of working it through, always working it through. But our threshold of inconvenience should not be higher than the inconvenience placed upon a child being raised in a single parent home and all the nuance that goes with that. That's a kind of a bold statement. I'd like to throw it out there for disagreement and or agreement in different kinds of ways. Arthur says, I wouldn't want another man to raise my children. Right. So you're looking at your wife and you frustrated, right? Man, I'm young. I can still have another life, right? What's these streets like, right? But whatever you feel in there, that's relatively selfish, right? That's got to be hugely selfish when juxtaposed against the identity of dad. So any last thoughts in that space? Any new thoughts come out before we transition?
I mean, I think that statement, like, I think the emotional statement of not having someone else raise your child is like that's honest. Like that is like your raw emotion. At the same time, I oftentimes, one of the things my wife and I always told each other is that if we can't give you what you need, then you do not need to be with us or with each other. So if I don't make you happy or if I'm not emotionally finding what you need, then you need to find someone who can give that to you. But at the same time, I'm not going to keep you away from your child, or I'm not going to do anything that hinders that, barring, again, any physical or any emotional, I can't remember, trauma, right? Mm-hmm. So I think that's the thing that has to be the addition to that caveat is if you're not happy and you're seeing that you being with the other person is detrimental to your health and detrimental to the relationship with your child because the home is chaotic, it's traumatic, it has to be physical, it could just be emotional, y'all can just be snapping at each other, right? So that becomes an environment that is not going to be helpful for the child. But at the same time, you have to be realistic and co-parent, peacefully and adult-like. So you can't say to an extent, if you're dating, be open, be truthful, but do not like hold a grudge or hold ill will. And then that child sees that and then begins to internalize that, like, okay, this is a normal adult behavior, in the lack of a better term.
Yeah, you're talking about the mechanics of raising children in single-parent homes. What is the father role? What is the mother role? How do you do that seamlessly for the benefit of the baby? Absolutely. I'm referring to, I'm not talking about, man, you just are just going through it. This thing is just tumultuous, highly aggressive, not or emotional, physical. I'm not talking about, I'm just talking about the level of, dads just having to accept some kind of relationship nuance that they got to keep working at, keep being attentive to. But our personal frustrations in that space should be at such a high level where we would even consider leaving our babies. That's just my thoughts. I'm sure there's huge opportunity for critique of that. Travis, any last thoughts there?
Yeah, no, what I hear you saying is that, and definitely correct me if I'm wrong here, but we should be. What I hear you saying is that threshold of irritability, for lack of better words, should be high because we know the benefits of parenthood on upbringing of children, right? And so we got to be committed in that space, really for the outcome of our babies, right, of our children. And so, yeah. I mean, you have to be committed, and that threshold has to be high, is what I'm hearing you say, and I wholeheartedly agree with that, right? So,
Beautiful. So, especially for younger men where your street impulse is there,
yep.
you're kind of more in the moment. I'm imagining the narrative, and again, narrative should be challenged, but couples get together. Hopefully they've chosen when to not use protection and they've intentionally produced a child. Child is there. They have their nuances. Both of them get frustrated like I'm out, right?
Right.
You really think about your getting out for whatever you see as some value to you, of which it is, certainly. Juxtapose that against the impact upon the babies. Okay, let's transition. Mecca, you asked a question around how do you explore all your areas of your identity. So tee that up for us and contextualize it in the father space.
I think exploring all your identities relates to being as whole as possible when you go into, hopefully when you go into a significant relationship, but also when you go into fatherhood, but also to become a more understanding who you are. So your identity isn't just around what you think you are, but also the things that sometimes are put on you, right? So the easiest thing is if you played basketball for a number of years and all of a sudden you like art, does that mean that art can't be a part of your identity because you're only been known as a basketball player? And you could insert whatever that is in there. I can only be a professor. I can't be a thought leader, or whatever it is. So that's the idea of looking at yourself holistically, or looking at yourself through all your identities and accepting that these are things. Like, one of the identities that I have to accept is that I am not a really good communicator of my emotions, right? Mm-hmm. And I had to accept that in order to tell my wife, like, these are things that I'm not really good at, but I'm not going to just sit there and say I'm not good at it. I'm going to work on being more emotional and open and communicating, right? So that was one of my identities, because like a lot of people have been saying, I grew up in a home whose parents and grandparents did not express emotions, right? Like, at all. So it was, and it couldn't, like, I don't talk about this like anger or frustration. This is like all the emotions, right? My mom told me she loved me, right? But my dad kind of was indirectly saying he loved me, but it wasn't like the actual words. Yeah. Or when he did say it, it was like weird. Why is my dad saying, are you about to die all of a sudden? Like, what's going on? Because those words have never been said there. So that identity has never been there. Like, my dad's always been this stoic African dude that's going to get everything done. It's always been blah, 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 blah. So that's what kind of the intention of that is.
Yeah. I had leaned in when you first started talking, and I hear what you're saying more so around personality traits. Really, when I hear identities, I'm often thinking about social identity. So that's kind of how my training is, right? Obviously in the BEI space, but yeah, you're absolutely right. How do we not necessarily accept those? And so this is what I would add a nuance into the conversation, right? So for me, very same upbringings in terms of, I think, emotional connection. And I'm hinted at this earlier when I was talking about my father. And sometimes I wish that I had gotten, I was talking to my wife the other day, and I was like, I don't know if I truly knew my father, right? If I just knew him, other than, our interactions around, him telling me to do something, or him giving me advice here, right? Or if he see me doing something, he's correcting me, right? But when I say I don't know if I really knew my father, like, emotionally, how did he feel about certain things, right? Or how did he, one of the questions I was thinking about I wish I could ask my father now, who's not here, right, is, simple things like, what is one thing in your life you wish you had done, right? You never got a chance to do, right? Those kinds of, I think, emotional connections we look for family, that I just think my father naturally didn't give because of just his upbringing, right? But I would say, I really want to challenge it. I think sometimes that's natural to me, right? To be kind of emotionally disconnected because that was my upbringing. But I'm really trying to challenge that, right? To say, how do I do that better? And those are things we could, I think, personality wise, we could work through, or characteristics of how we engage with family could do differently, right? So,
man, that's very, very powerful, man. Because we're in higher ed, and typically social justice, identity dynamics come from academia, right? They're the ones that birthed the theories. They launched the new interpretation. They put out the latest data around child rearing and psychology and all these kinds of things. that we are always sort of first online to understand the wave of what we did good yesterday, what was problematic about that, and what we ought to do going forward. And among that is this emphasis on fathers adding into their parenting repertoire the display of emotion, right? Um, and that's juxtaposed against our own interpretations of our grandfathers and our fathers, who perhaps were not as emotional. But I don't know. I mean, is it healthy that our sons in particular see us? I mean, isn't parenting at some point putting on a Superman front, at least in terms of esteem development for your child? And as you get a little older, you reveal and you share and you cry and you emote. But at some point, don't they need to think dad is this, there's Batman, Superman, Spider-Man, dad, Aquaman. I mean that's an illusion in our head. But at what point especially if you have the maternal figure who's stereotypically nurturing and she's the emotional space or the comforter in that regard, isn't the balance a little bit more of dad just ain't a touchy-feely kind of guy, and I understand that. And so when dad says we're going left, I'm moving left. Ain't too much discussion.
Yeah. That's a fascinating question, and I've had this same conversation, and I have a daughter, right? So, and certainly my daughter is, I think, at least at 3-year-old, is exhibiting every stereotypical thing we think about with women. Like very emotional, right? She's very emotional. Yeah. And a large part is that she's challenging me to be what is not natural for me, right? And that could be where I'm thinking about, well, this experience I'm having with this 3-year-old little human is very different than what me and my father went through, right? So then I started to think, well, maybe I could have connected, more emotionally with my father. But you're right? Sometimes dad or parents, right, just have to be the superhuman, right? And there's time and place, and particularly family dynamics that might yield different things, right? So. That's a fascinating thought.
I mean, I agree. Like, I'm still to this day, if my dad called me right now and said my name, Emeka, I'll say either yes or sir. Because in my head, I'm like, he could reach to this phone. And I don't want him to reach to this phone, or he'll get a tone. Like, I don't want no problems with that, right? So I understand, like, yes, there are times where there are ages and developments where your children see you. And I did the same thing. I thought my dad was the smartest dude for a long time. I still think he's the smartest dude, like for a long, long time. And even now, but as you age and you begin to reveal who you really are as your father, like my father now and I have a way better, like, it's weird. Like, our relationship is like almost like you said, like Travis, like, I know my father now. I knew a lot more as he got older because he revealed a lot more. Like, my dad did not talk about what happened when he grew up. It was just he was born, then he came to America. Yeah. And that was it, right? So I'm like, I know there's some life in between there. Why don't you want to talk about it? And it took a little bit of time to get that. So I think the notion is that it should be age appropriate sharing, right? So my son is 5. I don't share everything with my son. I don't always, like you said, coddle him, but I want him to know that I'm proud of you. I'm proud of you that you did this. I believe in you if you want to do this. Even when I see you hesitant, that's okay, son. It's okay to be hesitant, but I want you to try, right? And I think that's something that, mommy's gonna pick you up and make you feel better, but daddy's gonna push you. Right, I want you to see your limits, so you know your limits, so you know how far you can go. And I think that's a wonderful balance if you can have that. But at the same time, like, I also know that sometimes we come across as ill emotion because most fathers have to be disciplinarians. Like, that's quote unquote the things that come with fatherhood. We're the ones that are going to make sure you're going to be together, right? And I think that kind of gives a positive and negative connotation. So, I mean, I really don't know in terms of like overall, but I just want to kind of share those thoughts.
No, I agree 100%. If you guys are listening in, thank you so much. Throw a 1 in the box just so we know we got some activity out there. I absolutely agree. You have to have age appropriate kinds of postures and identities, right? When I talk about development, I talk about, I have an obsession with the number 5, but birth, 5 years old, dawn of school, 10, right? Another development phase, 15, puberty, 20, at the dawn of true adulthood, 25, transitioning from physical into emotional, right? And so how you are a father at birth, I hope you are just doting with nurturance and time and reading and music and joy, right? 5 years old, you're getting them ready to go out into the society. That's a different kind of preparation, right? 10 years old, they're forming identity. They're in social groups. They're looking for peer standing. That's a different kind of love, right? But consistent throughout that, as a way of just sharing tips with parents, is you ought to have at least a love symbol, right? I don't like anything that critiques fathers or manhood. We're worthy of critique, but folks had a different way of raising and being in different eras, right? Hats off to them. Hats off to them, right? That's why we see improvement in our community, because that's done through generations. Hats off to mom and dad. And there's certain ways of being in the space here. I think we can be a bit more tuned into all of our emotions, but we also have to be very selective on the when and how, right? On the when and how. But an emotional signature might be helpful for dads, right? My dad was a hugger, right? He'd give me a hug. He certainly told me I was proud. And I try to use praise language for my kids, right? Hey, that was outstanding, right? I believe in two critiques, two praises, one redirection. Hey, you did good in school. Appreciate the way you communicated with me. Here's an area what I'd like to address. So, and emotions can be feelings, but they also can be statements of pride and gestures, hug gestures in that regard. Travis, I think you had to get something in.
No. I was agreeing with you, and I think that's a fascinating perspective on reframing emotions, right? Because we often misinterpret what emotions are, and emotions are just expressions of either sadness, happiness, gratitude. It's all of those things, right? And as you talk about, even the piece around complimenting is an emotion, right? And so, we often have to just continue to challenge our own notion around what emotions are, particularly I think as men, who oftentimes, I think, from my perspective at least, try to sometimes run away from that word, right, a little bit.
Yeah. As dads who are thinking about, take a little inventory of the last year, right? How many times have your kids seen you angered, right? And a part of discipline is conveying disappointment and anger, right? But then balance that out. How many times have they seen you laugh, right? I'm talking about a belly laugh, right? So we think emotion is direction to the child, right? But also child observes the environment. They see dad's coming at him. Dad said, "Oh shoot, dad's coming heavy," right? That means they're seeing intensity. Okay, dad does have emotion, but is his only emotion intensity, right? Or can they observe boisterous, joyful gut laughter, right? And hopefully your home is one where there's more opportunities for laughter and outward expression of fun, and that also balances out. If we're just a dad that's always the hammer, right? Then at some point they're not forgetting him. They ain't no way to please him, right? But if they can see us in our nuances with our friends and wives, the anger has more poignancy if they see it contextualized with other emotions. Yep. All right, man. Beautiful. This is a halfway point here, y'all. Thank you all for joining us. Please come on over to the YouTube channel. Give us a like, a share, a subscribe. If you think fathers could benefit from the conversation, we truly welcome them to join us. So our topic for today was how do you, in what ways do you father different and the same as you were fathered? Okay. In what ways do you father different and the same as your father? All right. Who wants to take that on? Doc, both of y'all are docs, but Travis, what do you think?
Yeah, I'll jump in on that one. I often describe my father. So some context on my father: he was a black man born in the 40s in Mississippi and really never left. So, and so to think about the upbringings of my father, on at least being birthed right after, or shortly thereafter, not far after, the Great Depression in Jim Crow South. My father was a stickler on the importance of men being hard workers, contributing to our homes, and a large part, I think, of my work ethic and everything I've been involved with. I often talk about with many folks, right? There's nothing I start that I don't finish, right? That's usually an attribute I really credit my father with, because he was big on making sure you give 100%. on anything you commit yourself to. And so I find myself wanting to be, and certainly fathering that way now, even with my little 3-year-old, continuing to try to teach her how to follow through on things, right? If you commit to something, she gets frustrated, she can't do something. I'm like, no, let's keep at it, man. Let's definitely keep at it. And differently, my father had, one daughter who was much older than me, so I wasn't raised with her, and so in my house was all boys, right? And so, certainly I think, I don't know if that's an attribute of how I father differently, but as I mentioned earlier, my daughter is challenging me on those emotional pieces in a way that I have never seen in my household, being in a house with all men, all boys. And so there's certainly a different style of parenting. The atmosphere of our house is very different. I tell folks I'm outnumbered in here, man. Like I'm the only man in here. And versus when I was growing up, my mom was outnumbered, right? 4-1. So, so it's a different energy in the house nowadays than of course my upbringing.
Yeah, no, it's funny. I just tell a quick story. I have four sons and 2 daughters, right? And my oldest daughter was by my first wife, and my 5 now are by my second wife. And the 4 boys are older, and the daughter's the youngest. And when she's going through whatever her identity, social construct is at the moment, and she's emoting and emotional, right? I have to say, I don't know what to do. I don't know how to respond. What are you saying? Do you want me to solve this problem? Do you want me to tell you that you're over exaggerating, right? Or do you just want me to kind of listen and give you a hug, right? I had to confess to her, Doc. I had to say, if you were one of the boys, I would say, hey, look, get your stuff together, right? Here's the situation. Read it down the line, make your shot, come back, whatever. But with the baby girl, because I didn't want to come at her to crush her spirit, right? There's male, female nuances there. I just had to confess. What is it you need? Tell me what you need. And that's another dynamic of 2-parent homes. I had to go to the wife. I said, baby girl's acting this way. If it was the boys, this is what I would do. But I don't know if that's the proper response, right? I just had to confess. What do you need?
And it is funny. That's some honesty. So I don't have that. I have a son, right? But my wife's the only child, and my son's the only child. And I come from a house full of, I have 2 older brothers, and my mom is one of 7, and she's the oldest of the kids in her household, and my dad is the oldest of all my grandparents' children in Nigeria. So there was always hierarchy in my home. Right. So there's hierarchy. There's 2 things that were always instilled in us. There's hierarchy, and we share everything. You share because that's how we make it. All right. So the things I do the same. We share everything in our home. I teach my children, you are my child, you share everything. Nothing is granted. The other thing we do the same is work ethic. My parents worked. My father worked. The only time I've ever seen him take vacations was when he was going to Nigeria. And when he went to Nigeria, it was usually to take care of his brothers, sisters, and his mother. So I didn't see that as really a vacation. It was just he needed to go home, right? That's how he would reference it. So work ethic, share, and hierarchy. The hierarchy, and when my dad, it was my dad, then it was my mom, then it was my oldest brother, then it's my next oldest brother. So I was taught if your next oldest brother wasn't there, or if your oldest brother wasn't there, think like your next oldest brother. If your next oldest brother wasn't there, you think like your mom. If your mom wasn't there, then you think like your dad. And if no one was there, just don't do anything, right? So it was very, very nuanced, right? So I try to teach hierarchy the same way. Like it's you have to follow somebody's rules, your mother or me, in that context. So that's the things that I keep the same. And respect. My dad is big on respect. You do not disrespect other people, and you do not let people disrespect you. So I make sure people say my name correctly. I make sure people understand or convey my message. And if you disrespect me, like I don't need to talk to you. All right. I won't get violent. I don't have to do that anymore, but I'll just use words to slap you instead. And then lastly, the things I do different. The difference, I think, is I try to convey messages that my son has, like cultural identity, right? So cultural identity wasn't really given to me in the way that I could understand it. So how I give cultural identity to my son is very nuanced, it's very explained, and it's helping them understand, like, son, I want you to understand who you are, where you come from, how you're connected to this greater thing, and that no matter what you encounter into these racist spaces that we call, America, you should not belittle yourself. You should not be less than. So those are the things that I try to ingrain in him from like day one, from how his name, like we had a full on naming ceremony with my father. Everything, he has a full on Igbo name, like he has no English name. And when I tell him when people mispronounce it now, I make him go back and say, make sure they know how to pronounce your name correctly. So I think those are just like the differences and the sames that I can think of just right now.
Ikegwano.
That is correct.
The dot. Man, that's profound. Just briefly, my mother was from France. Um, as far as I can glean, kind of had a hard kind of life. Grandfather was a Muslim. My grandfather was. Her father was. Mother was Catholic. This is France, 1940s, right? Um, you know, Algerians were considered sort of the black folk of Europe at the time, and so she kind of had some cultural nuances there. But she was the disciplinarian in my house when I was growing up. She was the one that was she was the spanker, and so my dad was not. In fact, the first time, Travis, my mother made him with me. Oh, you could just see he was broken. He was hurt. I had to console. It's okay, Dad. It's okay, Dad. But no, that just wasn't in his spirit. He was a very spiritually grounded man, heavy into his faith, Catholicism. But for whatever reasons, he was always just a source of compassion, a model of service. So I was the disciplinarian in my house. So I certainly didn't take that particular role. But the one thing that probably stood out the most for me was his priority on education. He was enlisted in the Air Force, had exceeded the highest level an enlisted person could, was the national unlisted officer of the year at one point, which kind of conveyed to him that he could succeed in whatever his path was. But if you don't have a bachelor's degree in the military, you can't go for the officer track, not out of capability, but absence of credential. And so he wanted to make sure that he broke that cycle with me. And so he put major emphasis on education, and that was something that I definitely kind of inherited. And he always was very concerned about relationships, right? Are people seen? Are they included? Do they feel valued? Are they heard? And I think in some ways that's kind of been a catalyst that mirrors both education and human value. That sort of shaped my career choices, because higher education is definitely a space that prioritizes education, the value of human, and then culturally breaking the cycle of first generation among the people. And so it was through his example that shaped my life's choices, particularly in terms of career. But in terms of discipline, no, I didn't get any of that from my dad. I got that from my mom. Okay. All right, gentlemen, we are at 52. I want to ask this last question, and then we can close it out, let y'all get to your Sunday. Thank you, guys. If you're in the boxes, please let us know if you have any questions. I'd love to hear that. This would be the time to put them in the box, and we will address them. So the last question I want to share is, how important is it to see your children do better than what you have done? And let's just deal with that for how important is it to see that your children do better than what you have done? And if you could name what that looks like, because I'm talking to two doctors who have some connection to two parents, who are currently raising children in two-parent homes, right? So is it important that they do better than you do? And what does that look like?
Yeah. So, better than what I have done is I want to trouble that a little bit, and I think it's a great, excellent question, because I think as parents we naturally want our kids to be better than us, right? I mean that's what we're trying to do, right? We're trying to promote a generation that's better than what we are, right? So, but I think what that looks like is, and this is maybe somewhat counterintuitive, and we think about it is, is pushing them to be excellent, right? As I talked about with my daughter, right? I'm always trying to push her to finish things. You start something, you finish it, right? And you finish strong, you give it 100%, even at this young age now. But also leaving space for failure, right? Because I think part of trials in them learning who they are, learning what their passions might be, because that might morph over time, is to allow some level of failure or a true redirection of passion, right? So you might try this, you give it 100%, you feel like this is not for you, right? Then you move on to do other things. And one of the things I do want to credit my father for, right, is my father was in the entrepreneurial space. My father was a farmer in Mississippi. Never really preached the value of education. I mean, my father had an 8th grade education, so didn't really understand education, let alone me being a former student athlete. But I think what my father allowed, though, is he didn't necessarily understand it, but he was always about, if you're going to do it 100%, right? And it was different than what his path I think he wanted me to go, right? Because my dad, I think, would have loved to see me take on the family farm and kind of carry on that legacy. But he allowed me to get involved in what he saw me passionate about, which was sports, higher education, going to college and play college football, right? And he was, and he was able to witness that and push me to give my all in whatever that space I was interested in. And so I think it looks like allowing our kids to pursue their dreams, but also with the undergirth of, certainly excellence and making sure that they're engaging 100%.
Travis, let me build on that and pose another question to you. In the space of education, they can't get any higher than you.
Yeah.
So is it a PhD and a law degree, right? And so I'm asking this question because in previous conversations, we were saying, we want our children to be better than us. But that question has been asked generationally since emancipation, right? And families grew up in civil rights era or pre-civil rights, right? And they were making waves and gaining agency and using what was in front of them, always motivated to improve their immediate life, but also through choices the life of their children and unborn children. Well, you fast forward, for example, Arthur, he states, I think by the nature of how we live now versus how I grew up are galaxies apart, right? I think it gives them a new foundation of how to live and heights to reach. But that question has always been asked, and here it is manifesting in, we all broke, well, at least I broke the first generation cycle, right? I have a master's degree, right? I got a degree and one, from my parents. You all have a degree and one, right? And so at what point does our thinking as fathers, as Black fathers, who have been the inheritors of previous parents pushing us, right, to gain education, what is the next destiny, right? Is it something in the financial space? Is it something in the political space? Are we going Kennedy's on them, right? So I want to get some nouns tied to that a little bit.
Yeah. So although I value education, obviously, I've spent almost half of my life, right, pursuing this. I often am in the space where I'm talking about at least higher education in America not being the only path to success. And so, as I mentioned, my dad didn't push it. He in my house, they didn't necessarily push you. You need to go to college. You have to go to college, etc. My motivation from college was I wanted to pursue football. I was like, I want to make it to the NFL. I was trying to be the next Eric Williams from the Dallas Cowboys and Nate Newton, etc. Those who are Cowboys fans in the 90s. But, and so it's about pursuing excellence in whatever that is, right? Maybe my daughter or children at some point don't pursue higher education, but maybe they're the next Steve Jobs, right? Yeah. Or whoever else. Who's the other? Steve Jobs, I don't think went to college, right? It was an entrepreneurial space, right? And whatever they decide to do, they are excellence, and they are leaving a mark on this earth to make the world a better place, right? And we can do that, I think, in my opinion, outside of even any one industry, right? Whether that's the financial industry, whether that's education, higher education, whether that's entrepreneurial spaces, right? And so sports, et cetera. So I think that's what I think about when I think about being better. I think about her footprint, my children's footprint on this earth will be larger than mine. and whatever that means, whether that's, whatever their chosen field or occupation or purpose is in this earth. So,
Yeah, no, I feel you on that. I'm also hearing both of us and probably Emeka struggling a little bit to define it, right?
yeah.
Arthur, he's jumping in there. I appreciate your activity. He brings up a class dynamic. Sometimes wonder, how do I teach my children some of the core values that I had to learn from my socioeconomic environment, i.e., I don't want to speak for Arthur. Arthur's has connections in the NFL and probably, had an economic reality similar to all of us, and a certain kind of grind and, tenacity and ways of handling things that bode us very well. But how do you then learn? How do you then teach that same grit grind to your children when they're in a different economic status, right? And I say this because of our parents, our world has changed. We're the inheritors of a new step. And I think when we want to follow the same adage of improving circumstance for our children, how is that defined, right? So for us, Dad got a high school diploma, I got a college. That's tangible. That's measurable, right? Dad made X amount of money. You made X amount of money, right? It's tangible, right? Dad got his house. Mom got their house at 45. You got your house at 28, right?
Yeah.
So you have these tangible measurements. But for those of us who are the inheritors of that, where do we then move our children? Because if we keep following this same pattern, we're just going to increasingly become capitalistic oriented, and maybe that's okay, right? Or do we teach something that's a bit more sophisticated, that's not rooted in struggle culture, but in something new? And what that newness is what I'm sort of grappling with. Long response. Mecca, your thoughts in this space?
I think one of the things is, like, what you hit on is very, very interesting, right? So oftentimes how we, when we say these things, Brother, what you just said is, like, we try to quantify it by things that our dominant culture sees as valuable, right? Mm-hmm. So my son's better than me. He 5. All right, you can't tell me you're not better than me. Like, yeah, I got a whole PhD, but to see how he looks at the world and interacts with books who look like him, like, first of all, he is homeschooled. So his homeschool, my wife's homeschool curriculum that she developed for him reflects him and his culture. So how he views the world, and how when people's children who don't look like us don't want to interact with him, and my wife states, you do not have to interact with people who are not kind, right? That's gonna set him up light years from now, to where when he's, when I grew up, people who were not kind to me, I still had to interact with them. I still had to be kind to them, right? That's not the state of, like, the reason why I think my son's gonna be better than me is because I want him to understand he is free. He does not have to be, and someone once asked me, would I live in another country? And I personally cannot. And they kind of looked, and this person wasn't from America, and they're like, well, how could you stay there? I was like, because I understand this type of system. If I go to another country, I don't understand that system, so therefore it's foreign to me. Whereas my son might be like, I don't care. I can go live wherever in the world I want to go to. And I want him to have that type of understanding that he fits in and is productive to no matter what part of quote unquote society, because he's a global citizen, right? So he's learning 3 or 4 languages. Right. I'm not going to sit here and critique that. That's why I feel like the investment in him isn't going to return in terms of, well, you have a more advanced degree than me. So you have a Yale PhD in astrophysics. I mean, if you want to get that, that's dope. But that's not what's going to actually impress me with you, son. Son, you being able to say, I want to do this because I want to do this is a different statement than saying, like, me as a father and as a provider, I need to get a PhD so I can make more money, right? So I can provide for you, to give you the options and freedoms that weren't given to me because my parents were just, they had to do this to work long hours just to get me the bare minimum. And I think those are things that as you progress and you move on, you reinvest in your child to provide those cultural ties, that sense of belonging, that you don't have to always, because the natural order is to progress and to be more capitalistic. So if you got your house at 28, then the next generation should get the house, they get inherited it, and at 15, they become the corporate business, but then you perpetuate the things that were done to you to people who look like you. are other people of color, and therefore, you know, you become oppressive. And you know, so I know that's that's another long-winded answer. I am a professor.
No.
That's what we do. But I also wanted to state that being better than being better, your children being better than you isn't always going to translate to monetary value. It could come across in ways that they have different confidence, and when they see something, they do not have to stand for it. Nope, I am not going to be a part of this toxic work environment. I can leave. Or no, I'm not going to be in this relationship because I understand my worth. I don't have to sit here for it. And I think those are the things that are more valuable than are the things that show the growth in generations compared to our grandparents' generation, right? They had to be together even if grandma and grandpa were toxic. And in our parents' generation, well, you are single because you didn't work. Now it's the current generation is I choose to be married and to be in a 2-parent home, and I choose to have these children. I choose to make a home, and I want you to have those investments. So I think that's the growth, and my son is light years ahead because he sees the investment. He's gathering all the information. He's wrote 2 books. My son's 5, and my wife and him wrote 2 books together, and they're on Amazon.
Man,
so, Mika, what you're saying is, I think exactly what I was you articulated in a brilliant way. But in my mind, I think, you know, this is just my spiritual being, right? I think we're all here on this earth for a purpose, and our purpose is to contribute to this world in a way that is positively moving forward generations of folks to be free. And I like that term you use, right? And that freedom could be you know, not in the always just in the context of kind of power privilege in terms of the American, you know, the American system around race and caste system, et cetera. But you know, that freedom is how we make impact on this world, man. And so, you know, I want my children to make that impact, and that impact doesn't always have to be them making more money, but they're impacting lives, right, in a way that way much better than I have or am trying to do, right. And so, I think that's fascinating, man. I think that's powerful.
That's more than powerful, Doc. That's dope, and it's dope, and it's dope, and it's cool. So 2 things. Shout out to books. We gotta know what the books are. Shout them out.
It's one book is called Chuku Goes to the Barber. So it's CHUKWU Goes to the Barber, and then the other one is Chuku Gets a Library Card. And again, CHUKWU Goes to the library, or gets a library card, goes to the library. I should know these things, but
you found them on Amazon? Are they on Amazon?
Yeah, they're on Amazon. So if you go to Amazon, just look up Chuku Goes to, and then it should pop up. And it's a little brown boy, and it talks about his travels.
See, watch this impact, man. I'm about to go buy that book, and my daughter's gonna read it. So look at that. That's what I mean.
I greatly appreciate it.
Yeah, man. That's all right.
For conversation, supporting cooperative economics.
Yes, indeed.
Kuji Jakalia. Mecca, put those in the chat if you can. I don't know if you know how to do that. So let me give some response, and then we'll close it out with your 2 last thought. I was thinking more tangible, but both your Dr. Martin and Dr. Iguana, your thoughts about freedom, right? The ability to move through the world free, which means that you minimize the number of times you have to acquiesce, that you have to humble yourself, that you have to eat that frustration, right? Generationally, given all the things that Black folks have dealt with, there was constant times where they had to eat their humanity, they had to compromise their internal ethic, right? But with each generation advancing, the pinnacle, the highest level is to move through the world upon your own terms, understanding social contract, understanding your connectionness to humanity, that your culture positions you in a broader human narrative, but minimizing your having to sort of eat your dignity. I think that is profound. And so one of the ways in which I do that in practical kinds of thought patterns is try to get your children through school without debt, okay? Because debt automatically makes the obligation. If you can then position them with a launch can be resources, financial or network, that allows them to begin something that eventually they could own or have some autonomy in it. And I do believe that as parents, if we can get them through debt free and then support them in various ways where they can create a little nest fund and then they can take their risk in their business venture while they're young, creative, and they still got support network. Hopefully that becomes an autonomy, an economic autonomy that they then have. And when you have financial economic autonomy, meaning you are not beholden to a paycheck that has to then navigate politics and whatever industry it is, then you become free because you're there because you choose to be. And then no one can make you stay because you got a bill to pay that you have no other resources by which to do it. And then you get into sort of free land where, and that'll do something to, I believe, your human dignity in ways that our ancestors and elders would smile upon in significant kinds of ways. I hadn't thought about that until this conversation, so I thank you for that, Aneka and Travis. Huh. Let's go to Arthur. Arthur is shouting out the book. Oh, Arthur actually posted the book. I think he may have posted it in the private chat. Remember? Yeah, you did. So thank you, Arthur. Arthur's been a
Did we lose AJ?
I think we just lost AJ. Yeah.
Jump back on.
Okay.
Yeah, man. But I appreciate you sharing, man. That's going to be one of the things my daughter is very into, man, is books. So excited to put these in front of her, man, and see how she choose on it.
Yep. So Arthur, let me know if you want to get in and share some words. I want my beautiful friends to see my other friend. Let me know that. Just put that in the chat, and we will begin our last thoughts and rounds. Dr. Martin, I will let you close us out with any last comments or guidance or advice.
No, man, I appreciate the space to be here to participate, man. As you alluded to earlier, man, I've been kind of following this conversation for a while, and also personally, a group of friends and I have been been talking about this topic of fatherhood and the need for that, right? One of my friends, fraternity brothers who I've been in dialogue with, actually just finished his doctorate around the impacts of fatherless on Black kids, particularly in the Mississippi Delta. And so there it is a crisis. And so I think we have to continue to promote or normalize what healthy fatherhood is like, right? And also being able to challenge the notion around, particularly the narrative that we have around Black fatherhood in a way that promotes, again, making it normal to be healthy fathers and contribute to our households. And so, a topic I'm passionate about. I often saw it growing up, right? I was, it wasn't common, right? Particularly where my upbringings was to have, two-parent households, right? And so particularly at a place that was very, probably one of the poorest economic regions in the country. And we often know the impact of poverty as well, coupled with fatherless and single-parent households and what that do to children. And so I think we are at a crisis and a need to continue to elevate that conversation, but also challenge some of the narratives of what it means to be Black fathers, man. So I appreciate being in this space and continue to engage in this space with you as you build this platform as well. So thanks for inviting me to be here.
Dr. Martin, and I want to thank you for participating in the past, because as YouTube creators at a very low level where I'm at, it's those moments of likes and comments and subscribes and, attaboy, whatever the case may be, that keeps you motivated. I wake up and I see I got a new subscriber. I'm like, oh man, I'm king of the mountain, So thank you for being a motivator. Dr. Ikwano.
I think the one thing is understand that you have a lifetime to be a good father. It's not home runs or every single time. And then, brother AJ, I learned a lot from you about fatherhood through our one-on-one meetings, and I watched how you parented your children, and I got to ask you questions, and you gave me honest feedback, and I appreciate that. And the other thing for other brothers on this about being a good father, sometimes you need to have brothers who are going through this before you to share their wisdom and listen. Sometimes some people might have the best information, but glean what they're telling you and understand how this happens. Because everything brother AJ told me about how he exposed his children to everything is the exact same thing I do to my son. And I didn't understand it until I had my son. And I'm like, you know what? I'm gonna do what brother AJ kind of did. So I think those are the things that I would share with all of you, is this exposure, and you have a lifetime to be a good father. And if no one tells you now, you are a good father if you're listening to this, in my opinion, because it's an everyday improvement.
Man, hell of a way to close this out, both of you guys. What you're hearing is a parenting strategy: exposure, exposure, exposure. Like, let your kids touch everything: reading, bowling, pool, how to swim, opera, violin, whatever within your affordability. Because the more they're exposed to, the more breadth they have in life, the more they see things in a broad kind of way, and they see themselves in it versus just a narrow neighborhood kind of reality. The other piece was talked about was fathers need communities, y'all. Fathers need communities. We need mentors. We need elders. We need our own parents, our own fathers, but to be a sounding board for us, to kind of look at us and nod, that kind of, hey, you're doing good, young man, or, kind of frown a little bit. It means we need to have a recalibrating conversation, but we need confidants. We need people to talk us through. And the last thing I'll add to the conversation, young men, if you're listening in, be up on your condom game. Wear condoms. You want to make a baby out of preparation, which typically follows courtship, mate selection, extensive conversation, family acknowledgement and support, then deliberate choices, and then to remove the birth control and then produce a child. Too many children are being produced out of passion and not preparation. Condoms, men. Have condoms in your pocket, condoms in your backpack, condoms in your wallet, your car, your drawer, wherever you might find yourself in a situation where you might want to do that thing. Wear condoms. All right. On that note, B. Smith, good to see you, B. Great conversation. I appreciate you, brothers. Thank you guys so much for the support. On behalf of J4 Conversations, if you wouldn't mind sharing this with a friend, sharing this with a young father, letting them know that there's a space here where men are talking about these conversations, and it might be a good sounding board. If you see value, subscribe, talk about it, share with a friend, and help us grow. Thank you guys so much. Mecca and Travis, y'all stay on the call. On behalf of J4 family, one love, peace, love. We are out.